at beginninggenealogist.com. How are you doing? Hope you're having a good day. I have a question for you. How much attention have you paid to the community? Now, what do I mean by that? Basically, I know that many of you do take a look when you look at a family on a census record. You take a look at the family that's listed right before your family. You take a look at the household that's listed right after your family. But how much do you really study the community? Well, there's several ways to do that, and I want to make a suggestion for you to really start to scrutinize those census records in full detail. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, as you know, there is sort of the basic rule that everyone is always encouraged to do. When you find your family on the census records, look at the family before and after, look 5 pages ahead of your family, 5 pages after the page where you find your family in the census. But I also say take a look around at the details. Look at the occupations of individuals in the household, but also individuals in the neighborhood. Study the families. Now, many of you who practice cluster genealogy already know to study the family, study the occupation, determine whether there are any patterns, and look for some of the same neighbors in previous census years, particularly in those years where you may have a hard time locating a person. You have found them in 1880 and 1900, 1910, but you can't find them in 1920, but you find them in 1930, where sometimes it's very good to use the clusters or use the different individuals that appear in a community as a group. Also, of course, I like, and I'm sure everyone has their own biases in terms of what they like to see and what their eyes go to first on the census. For example, I do admittedly like to look at women. I like to look at 1900 and 1910 census to find out what I can learn about the women who are of childbearing years. If there are 6 children that she's given birth to and all are still living, but I only see 4 in the house, well, that's going to give me a suggestion to look for the children who might be adult and who perhaps are living on their own. But I also like to look at some details pertaining to the men. And this is an interesting way to learn something else about the community. Take a look, particularly 1910, which is very useful. And I'm referring to one of those columns all the way over on the right side of the census form. And I'm sure you know what I mean. All the way over to the right, you oftentimes see a reference to physical disabilities that an ancestor may or may not have had, whether the person was blind or deaf. But in 1910 especially, if you look at the 3rd column from the right, there's another piece of information that I particularly find useful. And it asks if that individual being enumerated was a survivor in the Civil War, whether they were Union or Confederate, whether it's Army or Navy. Wonderful information that can be gleaned there. Now, how do you apply that to looking at the community? Well, I also use Civil War records and Civil War pension records to study a community. One of the things that you find in a Civil War record is that there are all kinds of depositions and there are witnesses who testify on behalf of a soldier getting a pension, or perhaps the surviving widow getting a pension, and individuals who knew them when they were married, before they were married, and can testify that they were certain of that. Well, a lot of times when you look at those depositions and the witnesses who testified for those Civil War veterans, you find out that they're near neighbors. Well, find those individuals who are not necessarily your family, but they're mentioned in those pension files. Find those individuals also in the census, because they are in your circle of associates, family associates, whether they're related to you or not. But start to get your eye used to skimming that entire enumeration district for other Civil War soldiers, others who were survivors of the war, who were neighbors or near neighbors to your ancestors. If you have that opportunity, that's a great chance for you to find more about the community, because in many cases, individuals were witnesses for each other. Someone who's a near neighbor to your ancestor was a witness for your great-grandfather, perhaps, to get that pension. Well, in other cases, your great-grandfather served as a witness, perhaps, for one of his colleagues. It's another way of learning about the community and how families react and interact with each other and how they related to each other. And in some cases, it may surprise you that there's a relationship that you didn't know about that only comes out from one of those depositions. So by all means, start to really study the community in a different manner. And I think you're going to be surprised. Look for those details on the census. Study those categories. Go online and get some of those blank census forms so you can really see what those details are being captured. You may find some doors opened up for you in a wonderful way in terms of finding out more about your ancestors, more about the community in which they lived. And of course, that is always going to help you tell that story so much better. Anyway, that's it for today for me. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.